October 17th, 8:42 p.m. A narrow kitchen lit by a single hanging bulb. The hum of the refrigerator fills the silence between two people standing 3 feet apart. A glass rests untouched on the counter. The air carries the faint smell of dish soap and something burnt at the edges, dinner forgotten on low heat. Outside, a car door slams. Inside, someone exhales sharply. "You've changed," the other person says. It isn't shouted, it isn't kind either. It lands somewhere in between, casual enough to be deniable, sharp enough to cut. There was a time when you would have rushed to fix this moment, clarified your tone, adjusted your posture, softened your eyes. You would have explained that you're just tired, just stressed, just misunderstood. But tonight, something unusual happens. You don't. The silence that follows is not defensive, it's not rebellious, it is simply unoccupied. No scramble, no rehearsed apology assembling itself behind your teeth, no quick smile to smooth the air. You let the statement sit. From across the counter, their eyebrows lift slightly, waiting for the old choreography, the reassurance, the emotional cushioning. It doesn't come. And in that almost imperceptible pause, something rearranges itself inside you. Not dramatically, not loudly. There is no triumphant music, no declaration of independence, just a subtle withdrawal of energy, like a tide receding from the shore without asking permission. From a Jungian perspective, this is not defiance, it is not coldness, it is individuation beginning to outgrow the persona. The persona, that carefully negotiated social self, has always been efficient. It knew how to speak in tones that kept peace. It understood which parts of you were presentable and which were better translated into something more digestible. It was loyal, protective. But it was also exhausting. For years, perhaps decades, you adjusted yourself in micro-movements. You clarified jokes before anyone could misinterpret them. You explained your silences so they wouldn't seem hostile. You diluted intensity so others wouldn't feel overshadowed. You were fluent in preemptive reassurance. And then one day, not out of anger, not out of strategy, you simply stopped. Not completely, not carelessly, just selectively. The shift is subtle enough that no one can accuse you of rebellion, but they feel it. They feel that the familiar elasticity is gone, the reflex to bend has slowed. You still listen, you still respond, but you no longer chase. And that is when the atmosphere begins to change. It starts with confusion. People lean forward slightly more when they speak to you, as if trying to detect whether you are upset. They search your face for signs of disapproval. They ask if everything is okay more than usual. You say yes because it is. But what they sense is not distress. It is solidity. The old version of you absorbed projections quickly. If someone thought you were distant, you hurried to prove warmth. If they sensed arrogance, you rushed to demonstrate humility. If they misunderstood your intention, you reconstructed it for their comfort. Now, you allow misunderstanding to remain unedited. And the strange thing is, it doesn't injure you the way it once did. You walk through the grocery store a few days later, noticing the quietness inside your chest. Not emptiness, not numbness, just a reduction of noise. For the first time, you realize how much of your inner dialogue used to revolve around invisible juries. Imagined critics, silent panels evaluating your tone, your pauses, your boundaries. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires a gradual reclaiming of psychic energy from collective expectations. Energy once invested in maintaining an acceptable mask must return to its source. That return is rarely dramatic. It feels like this. Like standing in a kitchen and not correcting someone's misreading of you. Like answering fewer follow-up texts that exist only to smooth imagined tension. Like resisting the urge to explain why you left early, why you stayed quiet, why you chose differently. It is not indifference. It is containment. And containment feels unfamiliar at first, almost lonely. Because something else happens when you stop explaining yourself, the room grows quieter around you. Conversations that once stretched into late-night analysis now conclude sooner. People accustomed to your emotional labor find fewer openings. Some drift slightly away, confused by the absence of your usual accessibility. You notice it, of course you do. The old reflex whispers repair this, clarify, reassure. But another voice, calmer, slower, asks a different question. What if misunderstanding is not a threat, but a filter? The thought lingers longer than it should. Because if you no longer feel compelled to correct every perception, then something fundamental has shifted in your internal hierarchy. Approval is no longer oxygen. And when approval stops being oxygen, the entire ecosystem reorganizes. The night in the kitchen ends quietly. No argument, no resolution, just two people rinsing dishes under warm water. But as you dry your hands, you sense it. You did not shrink to maintain connection. You did not stretch to secure belonging. You remained. And that stillness, almost invisible, is the beginning of a different kind of power. You won't name it yet, but others already feel it. And not all of them are comfortable with what it means. The first real test comes quietly. November 2nd, 6:15 p.m. A long wooden table in the corner of a softly lit restaurant. Glasses clink, cutlery hums against porcelain, laughter rises and falls like passing waves. Someone tells a story about you. Not cruel, not flattering either, a simplified version, a manageable version, the kind of story that trims away depth so it can travel easily between mouths. You know how they are, someone says with a grin, always a little distant. The table chuckles. For a moment, the old instinct flares quick, almost electrical. You feel it in your diaphragm, that familiar urge to lean in and adjust the narrative, to clarify that you're not distant, just observant, not detached, just careful, not cold, just selective. Your mouth almost opens. Then it doesn't. Instead, you take a slow sip of water. The world does not collapse. No one gasps at your silence, no one demands correction. The story continues without your participation, it reshapes itself and moves on to someone else. And in that small, nearly invisible restraint, you feel something surprising. Relief. You realize how many years you spent acting as curator of your own image. How often you edited other people's interpretations of you as if they were drafts requiring revision. You believed that if a misunderstanding went uncorrected, it would solidify into truth, and that truth would isolate you. But now, something inside you is less afraid of that solidification. From a Jungian perspective, this is the moment when projection becomes visible. People do not see you as you are, they see you through the architecture of their own unmet needs, their own fears, their own history. When someone calls you distant, it may say more about their hunger for reassurance than about your emotional temperature. For years, you absorbed those projections like weather. If someone felt abandoned, you hurried to prove loyalty. If someone felt judged, you exaggerated your softness. If someone felt insecure, you minimized your strengths. You were unconsciously negotiating other people's shadows. But individuation alters that contract. The energy that once rushed outward now pauses, observes, decides. You begin to notice patterns. Certain people only feel close to you when you over-explain. Certain relationships thrived on your accessibility, not your authenticity. Certain bonds depended on your willingness to remain slightly smaller. When you stop explaining yourself, those arrangements destabilize. And not everyone responds gently. A week later, a message appears on your phone. Did I do something? You've been different lately. You read it twice. Different. The word hangs there, suspended between accusation and concern. There was a time when this message would have triggered a full internal audit. You would have replayed recent conversations, scanning for tonal shifts. You would have composed a careful paragraph, warm, reassuring, detailed. This time you type something simple. I've just been quieter, nothing's wrong. You send it. No elaboration, no emotional padding. Minutes pass. 3 dots appear, disappear, reappear. Finally. Okay, just checking. And that's it. The world does not fracture. But something else becomes clear. When you stop over-clarifying, people are forced to encounter their own uncertainty without your intervention. They must decide what your silence means without immediate relief. Some will tolerate that ambiguity, others won't. This is where misunderstanding begins to transform from threat into filter. It filters out those who required constant access to your inner weather. It filters out dynamics built on emotional overexposure. It filters out subtle dependencies disguised as closeness. And what remains? Fewer conversations, but heavier ones. You start noticing who stays even when you are not performing accessibility, who remains present without needing constant reassurance of your warmth, who trusts your steadiness without demanding explanation. These relationships feel different. Quieter, slower, less frantic. You begin to sense that being misunderstood is not always rejection. Sometimes it is simply misalignment, and misalignment is not tragedy, it is information. Carl Jung believed that individuation involves differentiating oneself from the collective. That differentiation can feel like isolation at first because the familiar validation loops dissolve. You feel that dissolution now. There are evenings when the silence stretches longer than it used to, your phone vibrates less, invitations arrive less frequently, some conversations fade without ceremony. You sit with that reality, and something unexpected happens. Instead of panic, you feel space. In that space, your thoughts are no longer preoccupied with how you are being perceived. You start noticing subtler things, your own reactions, your own preferences, your own fatigue thresholds. You leave gatherings earlier not because you are offended, but because your energy says enough. You decline invitations without inventing elaborate reasons. You allow pauses in conversation without rushing to fill them. The more you do this, the more you recognize how much of your previous identity was built around managing other people's comfort. And the deeper question begins to surface. If you are no longer managing perception, who are you underneath it? This is where the process becomes disorienting. Because when the persona loosens, the raw self underneath does not immediately present a polished alternative. There is an in-between phase, undefined, unbranded, quieter than expected. You may look the same, speak the same, work the same job. But internally, the scaffolding has shifted. You are less reactive, less available for misinterpretation repair, less invested in correcting every narrative. And in that reduced reactivity, you begin to feel something steady forming. Not confidence in the loud sense. Something older. A gravity. But gravity changes dynamics. Some people feel steadied by it. Others feel unsettled. And soon, one of them will confront you directly, not about your behavior but about your distance. And this time, the silence will carry more weight than either of you expected. December 11th. 9:03 p.m. A nearly empty parking garage. Concrete pillars cast long, fractured shadows under fluorescent lights that flicker without rhythm. Your footsteps echo as you walk toward your car. Behind you, another set of steps quickens. Can I ask you something? You turn, it's someone who has known you for years, close enough to remember older versions of you, close enough to sense the shift. They don't smile. When did you get so hard to read? The words are not hostile, they are unsettled. There was a time when that question would have pierced straight through you. You would have rushed to reassure them, insisted nothing had changed, promised greater openness, perhaps even confessed imaginary struggles just to restore familiarity. But now you pause. The air smells faintly of oil and cold metal. A car alarm chirps somewhere in the distance. You consider the question carefully. Hard to read. The phrase lingers and you realize something subtle. You are not trying to defend yourself from it. From a Jungian perspective, this is the moment when projection is no longer absorbed unconsciously, it is observed. You understand that being easy to read once meant being predictable, transparent, consistently responsive to external emotional cues. Your reactions were accessible, your inner movements translated quickly into visible reassurance. But accessibility is not the same as authenticity. And predictability is not the same as depth. You answer calmly. I'm not trying to be hard to read, I'm just not explaining everything anymore. The words feel stable as they leave your mouth. They study your face, searching for edges, anger, resentment, withdrawal. There are none. Just steadiness. But it feels like you're pulling away. You feel the old reflex twitch again, the desire to deny that perception, to shrink slightly so they don't feel abandoned. Instead, you ask quietly, pulling away from what? The question lands differently than expected. They hesitate. Because what they may be feeling is not distance, but the absence of constant access. There is a difference. For years, your inner world was available on request. If someone sensed tension, you explained it. If someone misread you, you corrected it. If someone felt uncertain, you offered clarity. Now there are pauses where explanations used to live. And those pauses require others to tolerate ambiguity. Not everyone can. Carl Jung believed that individuation demands separation from collective emotional expectations. It requires enduring the discomfort of being less immediately understood. You are enduring it now. The parking garage grows quieter, even the fluorescent buzzing seems distant. I just don't know what you're thinking anymore, they say. And you realize something that shifts the entire atmosphere. You are not obligated to be constantly legible. For much of your life, legibility equaled safety. If people could read you, they would not misjudge you. If they understood you quickly, they would not reject you. Transparency felt like protection. But protection can become overexposure. When every thought is translated for external consumption, there is little room for internal development. Your psyche becomes a public space instead of a private landscape. Now that landscape is reclaiming boundaries. You respond carefully. Maybe I'm thinking more before I speak. It's true. You no longer process emotions aloud in real time just to reassure others of your presence. You let feelings move through you without immediate narration. You allow complexity to remain complex for a while. That delay creates mystery. And mystery unsettles those who relied on your instant accessibility. They exhale slowly. I guess I just miss how open you used to be. There it is. Not accusation, not attack. Longing. And for a moment, you feel the pull again, the temptation to reopen every door to flood the space with familiar warmth. But you also recognize the cost. You remember the exhaustion of constant translation, the way your inner life once felt crowded by invisible expectations, the subtle resentment that accumulated when you realized how much of your openness was driven by fear of misinterpretation. You have crossed a threshold. And thresholds are not meant to be recrossed casually. I'm still open, you say, just not about everything. The distinction is quiet but monumental. Selective openness. Intentional silence. Measured response. This is not coldness, it is differentiation. From a Jungian lens, this is the ego strengthening its boundaries without collapsing into defensiveness. It is the integration of shadow, the parts of you that no longer need to be edited for comfort. The person in front of you nods slowly, they are adjusting. You can almost see it happening, recalibrating their expectations in real time. Some relationships survive this recalibration. Others don't. You unlock your car, the headlights flash briefly, illuminating the space between you. As you reach for the door handle, they ask one final question. Are you happier like this? You pause again. The answer is not simple. Happier. Not in the loud, celebratory sense, not in the way that sparks immediate excitement. But something inside you is calmer. Less fragmented. Less scattered across other people's interpretations. Yes, you say finally, I think I am. They nod. You get into the car, the engine hums to life, steady and low. As you drive out of the garage, you notice something unexpected. You are no longer afraid of confrontation. Because confrontation used to threaten your belonging. Now, belonging is no longer built on constant explanation. And that changes everything. But there is one final transformation you haven't fully faced yet. Because when you stop explaining yourself to others, you eventually have to stop explaining yourself to you. And that is where the real silence begins. January 3rd, 5:26 a.m. The city is still asleep. A thin blue light stretches across the horizon, barely touching the edges of buildings. The radiator clicks softly. The room holds that fragile hour where night hasn't fully surrendered and morning hasn't fully claimed its ground. You're awake. Not because of anxiety, not because of unfinished conversations replaying in your head. Just awake. You sit at the edge of the bed, elbows resting on your knees. No phone, no distraction, just the quiet. This is the space that used to feel dangerous. Before, silence meant exposure. It meant unanswered messages, misinterpretations lingering unresolved. It meant the possibility that somewhere someone was thinking the wrong thing about you and you weren't there to correct it. But now, the silence feels different. It feels owned. When you stopped explaining yourself to everyone else, something subtle began happening inside. The internal commentary softened too. You no longer rehearse imaginary defenses in the shower. You no longer script clarifications while driving. You no longer reconstruct conversations at 2 a.m., polishing lines that were misunderstood. Because here, what changed beneath all of it? You stopped assuming that misunderstanding equals loss. From a Jungian perspective, this marks a deeper stage of individuation. The persona, once hyperactive, has loosened its grip, and in its place, the self begins to organize experience from within rather than from reflection. The difference is quiet but profound. You used to ask, how am I being perceived? Now the question shifts. Am I aligned with myself? It is a slower question, a heavier one. It doesn't spark urgency, it demands presence. You stand and walk toward the window. The glass is cold under your fingertips. A few streetlights blink off one by one as dawn grows stronger. You realize something almost startling. There is more space inside your mind. Fewer simulations, fewer defensive rehearsals, fewer invisible audiences. That reclaimed energy doesn't vanish, it concentrates. You begin noticing your own reactions before they translate outward. You feel irritation without rushing to justify it. You feel attraction without immediately narrating it. You feel disappointment without converting it into diplomacy. There is a new containment. And containment breeds clarity. You see now how often your previous identity was shaped in response to anticipation. You were not only reacting to real misunderstandings, you were preempting imagined ones, editing yourself before conflict even appeared. That hypervigilance is gone. And in its absence, something deeper emerges. Preference. Not the surface-level kind, favorite food, favorite music, but existential preference. How long you want to stay somewhere, who drains you subtly, who sharpens you quietly, which environments feel expansive, which feel compressive. You start honoring those signals without announcement. You leave when you want to leave. You stay when you want to stay. You speak when it feels necessary. You remain silent when it doesn't. No justification campaign follows. And here's the paradox. The more you stop explaining yourself, the more internally coherent you become. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires tolerating isolation not as punishment, but as incubation. The psyche needs periods of withdrawal to reorganize itself around authenticity rather than approval. That reorganization is happening now. You notice it in small ways. You no longer overcommit just to maintain image. You no longer overdisclose just to maintain closeness. You no longer overcorrect just to maintain peace. And because of that, your relationships begin to sort themselves naturally. Some people lean in closer, drawn to your steadiness. Others drift away, unsettled by the absence of constant reassurance. You let both movements occur. This is the part that once would have terrified you. Because you once believed connection required effortful maintenance, that if you didn't continuously manage perception, bonds would collapse. Now you see something different. Connections built on performance do collapse. Connections built on resonance remain. The silence of early morning deepens that realization. You are not colder. You are not distant. You are less scattered. And in that consolidation, a quiet authority forms. Not dominance, not superiority. Authority over your own energy. Over where it flows. Over where it stops. You sit back down, breathing slowly. The sky has shifted from blue to pale gold. There's a question rising now, softer than before, but more honest. If you are no longer performing for belonging, who are you becoming? The answer is not a sentence. It's a feeling. Heavier, slower, less reactive. You understand now why this phase can feel isolating. Because when you withdraw from constant explanation, the world feels less noisy. Fewer dramatic misunderstandings, fewer emotional negotiations. But also fewer distractions. You are left alone with yourself more often. And what you're discovering in that solitude is not emptiness. It's density. An inner life that doesn't need translation to feel valid. A presence that doesn't shrink under misinterpretation. A calm that doesn't rush to defend itself. The clock reads 6:02 a.m. The city is awake now, cars pass below, doors close, life resumes its outward rhythm. But something inside you has settled into a different tempo. You no longer chase clarity from others. You no longer panic at ambiguity. You no longer fracture under projection. You remain. And that remaining, that grounded, unadvertised steadiness, is what quietly changed everything. Not because the world transformed overnight, but because you did. And once that shift happens, there is no real desire to return to who you were.